I want you to pause for a moment and consider a strange possibility. What if the world you have been taught to accept is not the true story of reality, but only a simplified version of it? What if something essential about your existence was quietly removed from the script long before you were born? Most people move through life believing they understand how things work. They believe events happen randomly. They believe success and failure are mostly accidents. They believe some people are lucky and others are not. But what if none of that is actually true? What if the greatest secret about reality is not hidden because it is complicated, but because it is simple enough to give you power the moment you understand it? I want you to imagine that humanity is living with a kind of collective amnesia, not the kind that erases memories of faces or places, but the kind that erases knowledge about our own creative nature. You wake up every morning, you move through your routines, you react to circumstances, and it feels as if the world is happening to you. But I want you to ask yourself something deeper. What if the world is not happening to you at all? What if it is responding to you in ways you have never been taught to recognize? For centuries, certain traditions hinted at a truth that modern culture rarely discusses. Ancient teachers spoke about the mind not as a passive observer of reality, but as an active force within it. They suggested that consciousness does not merely witness the world, it participates in shaping it. But somewhere along the way, that idea faded from ordinary conversation. The modern narrative tells you that reality is purely physical. It tells you that matter is fundamental and consciousness is secondary. It tells you that your thoughts are private events inside your head, disconnected from the external world. And if you accept that story, your role in life becomes very small. You become someone who adapts to circumstances rather than someone who influences them. You become someone who reacts to the world rather than someone who quietly participates in its unfolding. But I want you to look carefully at your own experience. Notice how every event in your life is filtered through perception. Notice how meaning does not exist in the object itself, but in the way you interpret it. The same situation can feel like an opportunity to one person and a disaster to another. The same words can inspire someone or wound someone else. What changes? The outer event remains the same, but the inner interpretation transforms the entire experience. This is where the forgotten script begins to reveal itself. The world you experience is not simply a collection of external objects. It is a relationship between your inner state and the circumstances around you. Your beliefs, expectations, and emotional patterns create a lens through which reality appears. And once you begin to see that lens, something remarkable happens. You realize that many of the patterns in your life are not random at all. They repeat themselves in subtle cycles. Certain opportunities appear again and again. Certain conflicts re-emerge in different forms. Certain emotions become familiar companions. It can feel as if life is echoing something back to you. Most people never question this echo. They assume it is just coincidence or fate. But what if these repetitions are clues? What if they are reflections of a deeper structure operating behind the scenes? Imagine that your life is like a theater performance. The stage is the visible world. The actors are the events and people you encounter. But the script that guides the performance exists somewhere deeper. You rarely see the script directly, yet it determines the direction of the story. In the same way, the invisible assumptions you carry about yourself and about life act like a script beneath the surface of your experience. If you believe the world is hostile, you will notice hostility everywhere. If you believe opportunities are scarce, you will perceive scarcity even when abundance is near. And if you quietly assume that your efforts will fail, you may unknowingly interpret every situation in a way that confirms that expectation. The strange part is that this process often happens without your awareness. It is not deliberate. It is automatic. Your mind absorbs beliefs from childhood, culture, and past experiences. These beliefs become the silent architecture of your reality. But I want you to consider something even more intriguing. What if that architecture is not permanent? What if the script can be rewritten? The idea may sound radical at first, but think about how often your perspective changes over time. Something that once felt impossible later becomes obvious. Something that once frightened you later becomes ordinary. When your inner state shifts, your experience of the world shifts with it. and sometimes the external world seems to reorganize itself in response. New people appear, unexpected opportunities open, old obstacles dissolve. To someone watching from the outside, these changes may look like luck or coincidence, but from the inside, they feel like a natural extension of a new way of seeing yourself and your life. Throughout history, certain thinkers and teachers hinted that this process follows laws just as reliable as the laws of physics. They suggested that consciousness operates according to principles that shape the patterns of experience. These principles were often described in symbolic language or preserved within philosophical traditions. They were not hidden because they were dangerous. They were hidden because understanding them requires a shift in perception. You must be willing to question the assumption that you are merely a spectator in your own life. You must be willing to entertain the idea that your inner world is not separate from the outer one. And once that possibility enters your mind, something begins to change. You start to observe your thoughts with more attention. You begin to notice how certain feelings influence your behavior and decisions. Gradually, you see that the boundary between inner and outer reality is not as solid as it once seemed. This is the moment when the collective amnesia begins to fade. You start to remember that your consciousness is not just a passive witness, it is a participant in the unfolding of events. The forgotten script of reality begins to come into focus. It suggests that your life is not governed solely by external forces. Instead, it unfolds through a dynamic interaction between your awareness and the world around you. When you understand this, you stop seeing yourself as a leaf carried by the wind. You begin to see that something within you has always been quietly steering the direction of the journey. And once you see that possibility, a new question emerges. If your consciousness participates in shaping your experience, then what hidden principles guide that process? What unseen laws connect your inner state to the reality you encounter every day? These questions open the door to a deeper exploration of the forces that shape your life, forces that have been operating quietly all along, waiting for the moment when you are ready to notice them. I want you to imagine that somewhere beneath the surface of ordinary life there exists a structure, a kind of invisible blueprint that quietly shapes the experiences you call reality. You may never see this blueprint directly. It does not appear in textbooks or in the daily news. Yet its influence is constant. It operates behind every event, every opportunity, every coincidence that enters your life. Most people move through the world without ever suspecting that such a structure exists. They assume life is unpredictable, chaotic, and governed mostly by chance. But I want you to consider another possibility. What if the universe is not chaotic at all? What if it is organized by a set of principles so consistent that once you understand them, the patterns of your life begin to make sense? Think about the physical laws you already accept. Gravity operates whether you believe in it or not. Electricity flows according to predictable rules, whether you understand them or not. The laws themselves do not require your approval. They simply function. Now imagine that consciousness also operates according to laws, not vague ideas or motivational slogans, but precise principles that govern the relationship between your inner state and the world you experience. These principles form what many ancient traditions referred to as the hidden blueprint of reality. They are not forbidden because someone locked them away in a vault. They are forbidden in a quieter way. They remain unseen because most people never look in the direction where they are revealed. Culture teaches you to focus almost entirely on the external world. You are trained to adjust circumstances, compete for resources, and react to problems. But the deeper architecture of life operates through another dimension, the dimension of awareness itself. Throughout history, fragments of this knowledge surfaced in different civilizations. The language varied, the symbols changed, but the underlying message remained remarkably consistent. In certain philosophical schools of ancient Greece, thinkers spoke about the creative power of mind. In Egypt, initiates described the universe as an expression of consciousness. In early mystical traditions, teachers explained that the world you see is inseparable from the state of the observer. These teachings were not presented to the masses in the same way ordinary information is shared today. They were often introduced gradually, because understanding them requires a shift in how you see yourself. When people identify only with their physical circumstances, they tend to misunderstand these principles. But when someone begins to question the nature of reality, these ideas start to feel less mysterious and more like something you were always meant to rediscover. I want you to picture the hidden blueprint as a set of keys, not physical keys made of metal, but conceptual keys that unlock the mechanisms of reality. Each key represents a principle that influences how experiences unfold. Individually, each principle reveals part of the picture. Together, they form a coherent system. When you begin to recognize these principles in your daily life, something unusual happens. Events that once seemed random begin to reveal patterns. Situations that once felt confusing start to make sense. You begin to see that life is not a sequence of disconnected accidents. It is a network of relationships between your awareness and the environment around you. These keys do not give you absolute control over every detail of existence. Life still contains complexity and mystery, but they reveal the underlying currents that guide the direction of events. Why are these principles sometimes called forbidden? The answer is not as dramatic as conspiracy stories might suggest. The real reason is psychological. These ideas challenge the common assumption that you are powerless in the face of circumstances. If you truly understood that your consciousness participates in shaping your experience, you would stop waiting for permission from the outside world. You would become more attentive to your thoughts, your emotional states, and the beliefs you quietly carry about yourself. That shift alone can change the direction of a life. For societies built around rigid systems of authority, this kind of awareness has always been difficult to manage. A person who understands the creative influence of consciousness does not rely entirely on external validation. They begin to look inward for guidance. That independence can be unsettling to systems that depend on passive participation. But I want you to approach these ideas in a practical way. Instead of treating them as mystical theories, consider them as observations about how experience actually works. Notice how your expectations shape your perception. When you anticipate a negative outcome, you become sensitive to every detail that confirms that expectation. When you feel confident and open, you notice opportunities that might otherwise pass unnoticed. This does not mean that you control every external event, but it reveals that your inner state determines how you interpret and respond to those events. Over time, these interpretations influence your choices, your relationships, and the environments you enter. Slowly, almost invisibly, your internal patterns guide the trajectory of your life. The hidden blueprint is not a single rule, but a collection of interconnected principles. Each one describes a different aspect of the relationship between consciousness and reality. Some explain why your thoughts and emotions influence the energy you bring into a situation. Others reveal why life often mirrors the beliefs you hold about yourself. Still others illuminate the rhythm and cycles that appear in every process, from the movement of seasons to the evolution of personal growth. When these principles are understood together, they form a map of how experience unfolds. Without the map, life can feel confusing and unpredictable. With the map, you begin to see that certain outcomes follow certain internal conditions with surprising consistency. I want you to imagine what it would mean to live with this awareness. Instead of reacting blindly to circumstances, you would begin observing the state of your own mind. Instead of assuming that external events define your future, you would explore how your inner orientation influences what you encounter. You would notice that your emotional atmosphere acts like a signal that interacts with the world around you. This is not magic, and it is not superstition. It is a subtle interaction between perception, behavior, and the deeper patterns that shape reality. When people first encounter this idea, they sometimes feel skeptical. That skepticism is natural, but skepticism can coexist with curiosity, and curiosity is often the beginning of understanding. In the sections that follow, we will explore the 12 keys that form this hidden blueprint. Each one describes a principle that has quietly influenced your life since the moment you were born. You may have already noticed glimpses of them in your experiences, moments when a change in perspective seemed to transform an entire situation. These keys will not demand that you abandon reason or logic. Instead, they invite you to expand your view of how reality operates. As you examine them one by one, you may begin to recognize patterns that were invisible before. The purpose is not to persuade you to believe something blindly. The purpose is to help you observe something that may have been operating in your life all along, waiting for the moment when you become aware enough to see it. I want you to begin with a question that may feel strange at first. What if the universe you see around you is not primarily made of matter, but of mind? What if everything you experience, from the ground beneath your feet to the stars far beyond the sky, is ultimately rooted in consciousness? For most of your life, you have probably been taught the opposite. You were told that matter came first and that consciousness appeared later, as a kind of side effect of the brain. According to that view, the universe existed long before awareness ever appeared, and the mind is simply a small observer inside a vast mechanical system. But the law we are about to explore suggests something very different. It proposes that the foundation of reality is not matter but mind itself. In other words, consciousness is not a product of the universe. The universe is an expression of consciousness. I want you to think about your own experience for a moment. Everything you have ever known has appeared inside awareness. Every color, every sound, every memory, every idea has been perceived through the lens of your mind. Even the concept of the external world is something you understand through consciousness. Without awareness, nothing could be known or experienced. This simple observation leads to a profound possibility. What if consciousness is not just a small part of reality, but the field in which reality unfolds? Imagine that the universe is like a vast ocean of mind, and every individual awareness is a wave moving within that ocean. The wave may appear separate for a moment, but it is still made of the same water as the entire sea. Ancient philosophical traditions often describe this idea using the phrase, "the universe is mental." At first glance, that statement can be misunderstood. It does not mean that the physical world is imaginary or that objects disappear when you stop thinking about them. Instead, it suggests that the substance underlying everything is consciousness. Matter is simply a more condensed expression of that consciousness, just as ice is a condensed form of water. When you begin to see reality from this perspective, a subtle shift occurs. The mind is no longer a powerless observer trapped inside a physical machine. The mind becomes an active participant in the unfolding of the world. I want you to imagine reality as a kind of projection. Think about a movie theater for a moment. On the screen you see landscapes, people, movement, and drama. To someone absorbed in the story, it can feel completely real. But behind the screen there is a projector, and inside the projector there is a film that determines what appears. If the film changes, the images on the screen change instantly. In the same way, the law of mentalism suggests that the visible world functions like the screen, while consciousness operates like the projector. Your beliefs, expectations, and mental images act like the film that shapes what eventually appears in experience. This idea does not mean that a single thought instantly rearranges the entire universe. Reality is more complex than that. The mind operates through patterns, habits, and emotional states that develop over time. When a thought is repeated with conviction and supported by emotion, it becomes a powerful influence within consciousness. Over time, these internal patterns guide the decisions you make, the opportunities you notice, and the actions you take. Slowly but consistently, your inner orientation begins to shape the direction of your life. Most people assume that circumstances control their thoughts, but according to the law of mentalism, the deeper process works in the opposite direction. The state of the mind gradually influences the circumstances that appear. I want you to observe how this principle appears in ordinary life. Two people can enter the same situation and experience completely different realities. One person sees obstacles everywhere and feels overwhelmed. Another person notices possibilities and feels motivated to act. The environment may be identical, but the interpretation is completely different. That interpretation then guides behavior. The person who believes success is possible takes risks, speaks with confidence, and recognizes opportunities when they appear. The person who expects failure hesitates, withdraws, and unconsciously confirms their own belief. Over time, the outcomes reinforce the internal narrative that existed in the beginning. The law of mentalism invites you to become aware of this hidden influence. It encourages you to look at your thoughts not as harmless background noise, but as creative forces shaping your experience. Every belief you hold about yourself quietly filters the way you see the world. If you believe you are capable and worthy of growth, your attention will naturally move toward opportunities that support that belief. If you believe you are limited or unlucky, your perception will search for evidence that confirms that idea. The mind acts like a magnet for meaning, organizing experience around the expectations it carries. But there is another dimension to this law that is even more intriguing. Your thoughts are not only interpretations of reality, they are also signals of energy. Modern science has shown that thoughts produce measurable electrical patterns in the brain. Emotions generate powerful chemical responses throughout the body. When a thought and an emotion combine, they create a state of being that influences your behavior, your communication, and the way others respond to you. This interaction between mental and emotional energy forms a bridge between the invisible world of consciousness and the visible world of events. Over time, this bridge becomes the pathway through which inner patterns express themselves in external life. I want you to notice something important here. The law of mentalism does not ask you to deny physical reality. It simply asks you to recognize that physical reality emerges from deeper layers of awareness. Just as a tree grows from an invisible seed beneath the soil, the conditions of your life often grow from mental seeds planted within consciousness. When you begin to change those seeds, the direction of growth changes as well. This process requires patience and attention. The mind has habits that were formed over many years. But once you understand that your inner state is part of the creative process of life, you begin to treat your thoughts with greater care. This realization leads to a powerful shift in identity. Instead of seeing yourself as a passive observer, you begin to see yourself as a participant in a mental universe. Your awareness becomes the place where possibilities are imagined, beliefs are formed, and intentions are shaped. The outer world then becomes a field in which those inner patterns gradually take form. When people first hear this idea, they sometimes feel uncertain or skeptical. That reaction is natural. After all, it challenges the assumption that life is determined entirely by external conditions. But I want you to remain curious rather than dismissive. Simply observe your own experience. Notice how your mental state influences the way you perceive situations and respond to them. As you continue exploring the principles that shape reality, the law of mentalism serves as the foundation. It reminds you that the universe is not a cold mechanical structure separated from awareness. Instead, it is a dynamic field of consciousness in which thoughts, emotions, and intentions play a subtle but meaningful role. Once you begin to understand this foundation, the other laws of the hidden blueprint start to make sense. They reveal how the inner world of mind connects to the outer world of experience, guiding the patterns that unfold throughout your life. I want you to consider a simple idea that has echoed through many ancient teachings. As within, so without. At first glance, this phrase may sound poetic or symbolic, but I want you to look at it as a practical observation about how life unfolds. It suggests that the outer world you experience is not separate from your inner state. Instead, the two are constantly reflecting one another. Your thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and emotional patterns form an internal landscape. The events, relationships, and opportunities that appear in your life often mirror that landscape in subtle but persistent ways. Most people rarely notice this connection because they are trained to look only at external circumstances. When something goes wrong, they search for causes outside themselves. When something goes right, they credit luck or coincidence. But the law of correspondence invites you to examine another possibility. It asks you to explore how the inner conditions of your mind influence the patterns that appear in your world. Think about how perception works. Two people can stand in the same place, witness the same event, and walk away with completely different interpretations. One person may see possibility where the other sees danger. One may see opportunity where the other sees rejection. The difference does not lie in the event itself, but in the internal framework through which it is interpreted. This framework is built from beliefs formed over many years. Some beliefs were learned in childhood, others developed through past experiences. Together they form a quiet narrative about what you expect from life. That narrative shapes the lens through which you see everything around you. When you believe that life is generous and full of possibility, your attention naturally moves toward evidence that confirms that belief. When you believe that life is unfair or limiting, your attention becomes sensitive to every detail that reinforces that idea. The outer world begins to resemble the inner story you are telling yourself. I want you to imagine your mind as a mirror placed inside a vast landscape. Whatever exists within the mirror influences what you notice outside of it. If the mirror is clouded with fear, you will detect threats even in neutral situations. If it is filled with confidence and curiosity, you will see openings where others see obstacles. The law of correspondence suggests that life continuously reflects this internal mirror back to you. This does not mean that you consciously control every event that happens. The world remains complex and unpredictable in many ways, but your internal state determines how you respond to events, and those responses gradually shape the direction of your life. Your decisions influence your environment. Your expectations influence the opportunities you recognize. Your emotional patterns influence the people you attract and the relationships you build. Consider how often certain themes repeat in people's lives. Someone who believes they are unworthy may find themselves in relationships where they feel undervalued again and again. Another person who quietly trusts their own abilities may encounter situations that allow those abilities to expand from the outside. These patterns can look like coincidence or fate, but when you examine them carefully, they often reveal a correspondence between the inner narrative and the outer experience. The law of correspondence does not punish or reward anyone. It simply reflects the internal structure of consciousness in the environment where that consciousness moves. This reflection process is not always immediate. Sometimes it unfolds gradually over months or years. A belief held consistently over time influences the choices you make and the paths you follow. Those choices then produce results that reinforce the original belief. The cycle can continue almost indefinitely until awareness interrupts it. When you begin to notice the connection between your inner state and your outer experience, you gain the ability to change the pattern. Instead of trying to force the external world to behave differently, you start by adjusting the internal lens through which you perceive it. I want you to notice something important here. The law of correspondence is not about blaming yourself for every difficulty you encounter. Life contains many factors beyond individual control. Circumstances arise from complex interactions between people, environments, and historical conditions. But within that complexity, your internal orientation still plays a powerful role. It determines how you interpret events, how you respond to them, and how you move forward afterward. Two people may face the same challenge, yet one emerges stronger while the other feels defeated. The difference lies in the internal meaning they assign to the experience. When you begin to work with the law of correspondence, you shift your focus from controlling the outer world to understanding the inner one. You become curious about your beliefs rather than assuming they are fixed truths. You observe your emotional reactions instead of being completely governed by them. This awareness opens the possibility of change. When your inner narrative evolves, your perception of reality evolves as well. Gradually, your actions begin to align with the new perspective. Opportunities that once seemed invisible come into view. Relationships that once felt difficult become easier to navigate. The world outside begins to respond differently because you are engaging with it from a different internal state. Another way to understand this law is to think of life as an echo. When you speak into a canyon, the sound that returns is shaped by the voice you send out. If the voice changes, the echo changes. In the same way, your thoughts and emotional patterns send signals into the world through your behavior, your tone of voice, and your decisions. Those signals influence how others respond to you and how situations develop around you. Over time, the echo of your internal state returns in the form of experiences that resemble it. The law of correspondence reveals that the boundary between inner and outer reality is more permeable than it first appears. This principle also invites you to take greater responsibility for the stories you carry about yourself. If you believe you are capable of learning and growth, you will naturally seek environments where those qualities can flourish. If you believe you are limited or unlucky, you may unconsciously avoid situations that challenge that belief. In this way, the internal story quietly guides the external path. By becoming aware of that story, you gain the ability to revise it, and when the inner narrative changes, the correspondence between your inner world and outer world begins to change as well. The deeper purpose of this law is not to control life, but to understand your participation in it. You are not merely observing the world from a distance. You are interacting with it through perception, belief, and intention. Every moment of awareness shapes how reality appears to you. When you recognize this connection, the world becomes less mysterious and more meaningful. You begin to see that the patterns in your life are not random fragments, but reflections of a dialogue between your inner consciousness and the environment around you. As within, so without is not simply a philosophical phrase. It is a reminder that the state of your inner world quietly echoes into the experiences you call your life. I want you to notice something that is easy to overlook. At first glance, the world around you appears solid and still. The chair you sit on seems unmoving. The walls of a building appear fixed and stable. Even the ground beneath your feet feels completely solid. But when you look deeper, reality begins to reveal a different story. Science has shown that everything you see is made of atoms, and atoms themselves are not solid objects. They are fields of energy in motion. Particles vibrate, electrons move, and energy constantly flows through what appears to be stable matter. In other words, the stillness you perceive is an illusion created by your senses. Beneath that illusion, everything is moving. This observation leads us to the law of vibration. It is the principle that nothing in the universe is truly at rest. Everything is in motion. Everything vibrates. Everything resonates with a certain frequency. From the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, movement is constant. But the law of vibration does not apply only to physical matter. It also applies to thoughts, emotions, and states of consciousness. Your inner world is not static. Every feeling you experience carries a particular energetic quality. Every thought generates a subtle pattern of activity in the brain and body. These patterns create what can be understood as a frequency, a kind of energetic signature that reflects your internal state. I want you to imagine a radio for a moment. A radio station broadcasts signals at different frequencies, but your device can only receive one station at a time depending on how it is tuned. If you turn the dial slightly, the signal changes and a completely different station appears. The broadcast was always present in the environment, but you could not hear it until your receiver aligned with that frequency. In a similar way, your mind acts like a receiver and transmitter of vibration. Your emotional state determines the frequency at which your awareness is tuned. When you feel hopeful, confident, and open, your perception becomes sensitive to possibilities that match that state. When you feel anxious, fearful, or discouraged, your perception shifts towards signals that confirm those emotions. The law of vibration suggests that experiences tend to resonate with the internal frequency you carry. This does not mean that life becomes a simple formula where every thought instantly produces a matching event. Reality is more subtle than that. But over time, the emotional tone you consistently maintain influences the patterns of experience that surround you. Think about moments in your life when you felt deeply inspired or motivated. During those periods, ideas seemed to appear more easily. Conversations flowed naturally. Opportunities seemed to align in ways that felt almost surprising. Now compare that with moments when you felt overwhelmed or discouraged. In those states, even small challenges may have felt heavier than usual. The environment may have appeared filled with obstacles. The outer circumstances might not have changed dramatically, yet your perception of them changed entirely. I want you to consider how emotions function within this law. Each emotional state carries its own vibrational pattern. Fear tends to contract awareness and focus attention on threats. Anger generates intensity and resistance. Gratitude expands awareness and encourages connection. Joy creates a sense of openness and creative energy. These emotional vibrations influence how you communicate, how you interpret situations, and how others respond to you. When someone enters a room with a calm and confident presence, people often sense it immediately, even if nothing is said. The same is true when someone carries tension or frustration. The vibration of the inner state becomes visible through behavior, tone of voice, and subtle body language. Your thoughts also contribute to this vibrational field. Every belief you hold about yourself creates a background frequency that shapes how you move through the world. If you believe that opportunities are possible for you, your mind becomes alert to signs that support that belief. You notice conversations, ideas, and openings that align with your expectations. If you believe that success is out of reach, your attention may bypass those same signals entirely. In this way, the law of vibration works together with perception. Your internal state does not only influence your mood, it influences what you see, what you ignore, and what you consider possible. Another important aspect of vibration is resonance. When two objects share similar frequencies, they can amplify one another. A simple example can be seen in musical instruments. If you strike a tuning fork tuned to a certain note near another tuning fork with the same frequency, the second one will begin to vibrate even though you never touched it. The energy of the first fork activates the resonance of the second. Human interaction often works in a similar way. Emotional states can influence the atmosphere of a room. Enthusiasm can inspire others. Calmness can settle tension. Negativity can spread quickly through a group. These reactions occur because people resonate with one another's emotional frequencies. I want you to see how this principle connects to your daily life. The vibration you maintain internally influences the environments you create around you. When you approach situations with curiosity and openness, you invite responses that reflect that tone. When you approach them with suspicion or hostility, you often receive responses that mirror those emotions. Over time, these patterns shape your relationships, your opportunities, and even the way you remember past experiences. The law of vibration does not eliminate challenges from life, but it reveals that the energy you carry influences how those challenges unfold. Working with this law begins with awareness. Instead of ignoring your emotional state, you learn to observe it. You notice the difference between moments when your energy feels expansive and moments when it feels contracted. This observation does not require judgment. It simply requires attention. Once you recognize your vibrational state, you gain the ability to shift it intentionally. A change in perspective, a moment of gratitude, or a decision to focus on possibility can gradually move your frequency in another direction. These small adjustments may seem insignificant at first, but over time they influence the overall tone of your experience. The law of vibration reminds you that you are not just a physical presence moving through a mechanical universe. You are also an energetic presence interacting with the environment around you. Your thoughts, emotions, and intentions generate patterns of movement that resonate through your behavior and perception. When you begin to understand this principle, you realize that your inner state is not merely a private feeling. It is an active force shaping the way you engage with reality. Everything moves, everything vibrates, and every moment of awareness contributes to the frequency you bring into the world. I want you to notice something about the way the world is structured. Everywhere you look, life appears to move between opposites. There is day and there is night. There is heat and there is cold. There is expansion and contraction, success and failure, joy and sadness. At first, it seems as if these forces are completely separate from each other, almost like enemies in constant conflict. But the law of polarity invites you to look deeper. It suggests that opposites are not truly separate things. They are simply different degrees of the same phenomenon. The difference between them is not kind, but intensity. In other words, what you call opposites are often two ends of the same scale. Think about temperature. We speak of hot and cold as if they are entirely different realities, but in truth they are simply variations along one spectrum. When the temperature rises, we call it warm or hot. When it falls, we call it cool or cold. The substance itself does not change. Only the degree changes. The same pattern appears in many aspects of life. Light and darkness are not separate forces. Darkness is simply the absence of light. Silence and sound are not opposing materials. Silence is the absence of vibration within the range you can hear. When you begin to see this pattern, a powerful insight begins to emerge. Many of the experiences you treat as absolute opposites are actually connected by a continuum. I want you to apply this idea to emotions and life situations. You may think of love and hate as complete opposites, but they exist on the same emotional spectrum. Both involve strong attention and emotional investment. The difference lies in the direction of the feeling. Fear and courage also share the same underlying energy. Fear is the anticipation of danger, while courage is the willingness to move forward despite that anticipation. Even wealth and poverty can be seen as points on a scale related to resources, opportunity, and perception of possibility. When the law of polarity becomes clear to you, it reveals something important. The states you consider negative are not completely separate from the states you desire. They are simply different positions along the same line. This insight changes the way you approach challenges. Instead of seeing problems as final obstacles, you begin to see them as positions that can move along the scale. Imagine a dimmer switch controlling the brightness of a light in a room. When the light is low, the room appears dark. When you gradually turn the switch, the darkness does not fight against the light. The light simply increases, and the darkness disappears as a natural result. In the same way, many emotional states can be shifted by gradually adjusting the inner conditions that produce them. Despair can move toward hope. Anger can move toward understanding. Doubt can move toward confidence. The energy does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to be redirected. I want you to notice how this principle appears in your own life. Think about moments when something difficult eventually led to growth. At the time, the experience may have felt painful or discouraging, but later you discovered that it forced you to develop new abilities, new perspectives, or new determination. The negative pole of the experience gradually transformed into a positive outcome. This transformation does not happen automatically. It requires awareness. But once you understand the law of polarity, you realize that the potential for change is always present within the experience itself. One of the most powerful applications of this law is the ability to shift emotional states intentionally. When you feel fear, your instinct may be to fight against it or to avoid it entirely. But the law of polarity suggests another approach. Instead of resisting the energy of fear, you can move it along the scale toward courage. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means acting with clarity despite the presence of fear. The same energy that produces anxiety can become the fuel for determination when directed differently. By changing your focus and interpretation, you gradually move your internal position from one pole toward another. This principle also affects the way you interpret external circumstances. If you view failure as the absolute opposite of success, you may see it as a permanent defeat. But if you recognize that both are part of the same continuum of learning and growth, failure becomes information rather than condemnation. It reveals where adjustment is needed. It shows you how to move further along the scale toward mastery. The most accomplished individuals in any field often understand this instinctively. They see setbacks not as final verdicts but as signals guiding them toward improvement. I want you to consider another subtle aspect of polarity. Every positive condition carries the seed of its opposite if it is taken to an extreme. Excessive confidence can turn into arrogance. Too much caution can become paralysis. Even success can lead to complacency if it is not balanced with awareness. The law of polarity reminds you that balance is dynamic. Life constantly moves between degrees, and awareness allows you to navigate that movement intentionally. When you recognize that opposites belong to the same spectrum, you gain the ability to shift your position along that spectrum rather than feeling trapped by it. You may begin to notice this principle in conversations and relationships as well. A disagreement that feels hostile can transform into understanding when both people adjust their perspective. Miscommunication can turn into clarity once the underlying intentions are revealed. The distance between conflict and cooperation is often smaller than it appears. By shifting the tone of your communication and the assumptions you carry, you move the interaction along the scale from tension toward harmony. The deeper message of the law of polarity is empowering. It tells you that the states you desire are not located in a completely separate universe from the states you wish to leave behind. They are connected along a continuum of possibility. When you understand this, you stop seeing life in rigid categories of good and bad, success and failure, victory and defeat. Instead, you begin to see movement. Every moment becomes a point on a scale that can shift through awareness and intention. This perspective gives you a new relationship with challenges. Instead of fearing them, you see them as opportunities to redirect energy. The world may appear filled with opposites, but beneath that appearance lies a deeper unity. Each pole exists because the other exists. They define one another and allow movement between them. When you learn to recognize this structure, you gain a remarkable ability. You can take the energy of any situation and gradually guide it toward a more constructive expression. In this way, the law of polarity transforms opposites from barriers into tools. It shows you that within every difficulty there is a direction that leads towards strength, and within every shadow there is a path that leads toward light. I want you to observe something that quietly governs almost everything in existence. Nothing in life remains perfectly still or perfectly constant. The tides rise and fall. The seasons change. The sun appears and disappears each day. Even your own breathing follows a rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. Movement in cycles is not an exception in the universe. It is the rule. The law of rhythm describes this constant movement. It explains that everything in life flows in patterns, shifting between one state and another in a natural cycle. Just as a pendulum swings from one side to the other, life moves through phases of expansion and contraction, growth and rest, activity and stillness. Understanding this rhythm can completely change the way you interpret your experiences. Most people struggle against the rhythm of life because they expect everything to move in a straight line. They imagine success as a steady climb upward without interruption. They believe happiness should remain constant. When difficulties appear, they assume something has gone wrong. But the law of rhythm reveals that fluctuation is not a failure of the system. It is the system itself. Every form of growth includes moments of acceleration and moments of pause. Every creative process includes periods of inspiration followed by periods of reflection. When you see life only through the lens of progress or decline, you miss the larger pattern that connects both. I want you to picture a pendulum moving from left to right. When it swings to one extreme, it eventually gathers momentum and moves back toward the opposite side. This movement continues naturally. The pendulum does not remain permanently on one side. In the same way, emotional states, personal achievements, and even historical trends follow rhythmic patterns. A period of excitement may be followed by a period of calm. A time of rapid growth may be followed by a time of consolidation. The challenge arises when you interpret these natural shifts as personal failures. When the pendulum moves toward difficulty, it can feel as if progress has stopped. But from the perspective of rhythm, the movement itself is part of the process that allows the next phase to emerge. Think about how this principle appears in your own life. There are moments when everything seems to flow easily. Ideas come quickly. Conversations feel effortless. Opportunities appear without much effort. During these periods, it is tempting to believe that the momentum will continue indefinitely, but eventually the rhythm changes. Energy feels lower. Inspiration becomes quieter. Tasks require more patience. Many people interpret this phase as a sign that something is wrong. They become discouraged and assume that the earlier progress has disappeared. In reality, the pendulum has simply moved to another point in its cycle. The quieter phase often contains the seeds of the next breakthrough. I want you to understand something important here. The law of rhythm does not mean you are helpless before these cycles. Instead, it teaches you how to work with them. When you recognize the existence of rhythm, you stop expecting constant upward motion. You begin to anticipate the natural shifts that occur in every process. During periods of high energy, you take advantage of momentum. You act, create, and build while the movement is strong. During quieter phases, you reflect, learn, and prepare for the next expansion. Instead of resisting the pendulum, you learn to move with it. Emotional rhythm is one of the most powerful examples of this law. Your feelings are not static. They move in waves. Moments of enthusiasm can be followed by moments of doubt. Confidence can give way to uncertainty. If you interpret these emotional shifts as signs of failure, you may become trapped in frustration. But if you recognize them as part of a natural cycle, they lose their power to discourage you. You begin to observe your emotions with more calmness. You realize that a difficult moment is not a permanent state, but simply one point along the arc of the pendulum. The law of rhythm also explains why extreme experiences often create equal and opposite reactions later. When excitement reaches a very high peak, the pendulum naturally swings toward a calmer state afterward. This pattern appears in personal life, in business cycles, and even in cultural movements. When you are unaware of this principle, these shifts can feel confusing or unfair, but once you understand the rhythm behind them, you begin to see the larger pattern. Instead of reacting emotionally to every swing of the pendulum, you maintain a steadier perspective. One way to master this law is through awareness of your inner center. Imagine standing at the pivot point of the pendulum rather than at its swinging edge. When you identify completely with the extremes of experience, you feel every movement intensely. But when you remain centered in awareness, you can observe the movement without being overwhelmed by it. This does not mean ignoring your emotions or pretending challenges do not exist. It means recognizing that each phase is temporary and that the larger cycle continues beyond the moment you are experiencing. I want you to think of the law of rhythm as a reminder of patience. When life feels slow or uncertain, the pendulum is not stuck. It is gathering momentum for the next movement. The quiet phases often allow you to develop insight, resilience, and clarity. These qualities prepare you for the next opportunity that emerges. Without the rhythm of contraction, expansion would have no foundation. Just as a musician relies on pauses between notes to create harmony, life relies on alternating phases to create balance. You may begin to notice that many of the frustrations you have experienced came from expecting permanence in a world designed for movement. When you expect every moment to feel the same, change becomes threatening. But when you accept rhythm as a fundamental principle of existence, change becomes natural. You start to see each phase as part of a continuous flow rather than as isolated events. The true mastery of the law of rhythm comes from aligning your awareness with the deeper movement beneath the surface of events. You observe the cycles without losing your sense of direction. You understand that both progress and pause are necessary components of growth. In this way, the pendulum of life becomes less intimidating. Instead of pushing you from one extreme to another, it becomes a guide showing you how the energy of experience moves through time. When you learn to recognize this pattern, you no longer fear the downward swing. You understand that every movement carries the potential for the next rise, and that the rhythm of life is not something to resist but something to understand and navigate with wisdom. I want you to think about how often people explain events in life by using the words luck, coincidence, or chance. When something good happens, it is called luck. When something difficult appears, it is sometimes described as bad luck. These explanations seem simple and convenient, but they hide something important. They suggest that the world operates randomly, as if events appear without any deeper structure behind them. The law of cause and effect invites you to look at reality in a completely different way. It proposes that nothing happens without a cause. Every outcome you see is the result of a chain of influences that existed before it. Some of these causes are visible and easy to understand. Others are subtle and unfold quietly over time. But according to this principle, there is always a relationship between cause and result, even when the connection is not immediately obvious. Think about the physical world for a moment. If you drop an object, gravity pulls it downward. If you plant a seed in fertile soil and care for it properly, a plant eventually grows. If a musician practices every day, their skill gradually improves. In each case, the result follows the cause in a consistent pattern. You would not call a harvest lucky if it came from careful cultivation. You would not call a trained athlete lucky simply because years of practice created strength and skill. In the physical world, we accept that causes produce effects. Yet when it comes to life experiences, many people forget this principle and attribute outcomes to chance. I want you to consider how this law operates within your own life. Your daily choices create patterns that extend far beyond the moment in which they are made. A single decision may appear small, but repeated decisions accumulate into habits. Habits influence your direction, and direction eventually produces results. For example, someone who dedicates time to learning a skill gradually becomes more capable. Another person who avoids effort may remain in the same place for years. From the outside, The difference in outcomes might look like luck, but when you trace the chain of events back to their origins, you often discover consistent causes behind them. The law of cause and effect also operates within the invisible world of thought and belief. Your internal assumptions influence how you perceive situations. Those perceptions guide the actions you take. Your actions create consequences that eventually shape your environment. Over time, this sequence becomes a pattern that defines your life experience. A belief about your abilities can influence the risks you are willing to take. The risks you take influence the opportunities you encounter. The opportunities you encounter influence the results you achieve. When the results appear, they may seem like sudden breakthroughs or unexpected failures, but in reality, they are the visible expression of a chain of causes that developed gradually. I want you to imagine a row of falling dominoes. When the first domino moves, it pushes the next one, and the movement continues down the line. By the time the final domino falls, the original cause may be far behind in time and difficult to remember, yet the connection still exists. In life, many results are like the final domino. They appear suddenly, but they were set in motion by earlier choices, thoughts, and conditions. The law of cause and effect encourages you to look beyond the final event and explore the sequence that produced it. This perspective changes the way you interpret success and difficulty. When you understand that outcomes follow causes, you stop viewing life as a series of random surprises. Instead, you begin to look for the patterns behind events. If something works well, you examine the causes that produce that success so they can be repeated. If something goes wrong, you explore the factors that contributed to the problem so they can be adjusted. This approach replaces blame with understanding. Instead of asking why something happened to you, you begin asking what chain of influences created the result. You see, another important aspect of this law is personal responsibility. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for every difficulty in life. Many circumstances involve multiple causes beyond your control, but recognizing cause and effect reminds you that your actions and decisions still influence the direction of your life. When you act with intention, you plant seeds that grow into future outcomes. When you neglect those seeds, the results reflect that neglect. This awareness empowers you because it shows that your present choices can shape the conditions you experience later. Consider how this principle appears in relationships. Trust between people does not appear instantly. It grows through repeated actions that demonstrate reliability and honesty. In the same way, conflict often develops through patterns of misunderstanding or unspoken tension that accumulate over time. By recognizing the causes behind these patterns, you gain the ability to change them. A small shift in communication today can prevent a larger problem tomorrow. A consistent effort to listen and understand can transform the atmosphere of a relationship over time. The law of cause and effect also encourages patience. Because causes often unfold slowly, their results may not appear immediately. When someone begins exercising regularly, physical changes do not happen overnight. When someone starts studying a new subject, understanding grows gradually. The same principle applies to inner growth. A shift in perspective may begin quietly, but with time, it influences behavior, decisions, and opportunities. Eventually, the outer world begins to reflect the new internal cause that has been developing beneath the surface. I want you to notice how empowering this idea can be. If results always follow causes, then your future is not controlled entirely by chance. The actions you take today become the causes of tomorrow's outcomes. This does not guarantee a perfectly predictable life, but it provides a direction of influence. By choosing your thoughts, habits, and decisions carefully, you begin to guide the chain of causes in a more intentional direction. Many people wait for luck to appear before they act. They hope that circumstances will change on their own. But the law of cause and effect reminds you that change usually begins with a cause you create. When you plant the right seeds consistently, the results eventually follow. The timeline may vary, but the principle remains reliable. Just as gravity operates regardless of belief, the relationship between cause and effect operates quietly in every moment of life. Understanding this law invites you to become more aware of the small decisions that shape your days. Each thought you reinforce, each action you repeat, and each belief you nurture becomes part of the chain that leads to future experiences. When you see life through this lens, luck becomes less mysterious. What once looked like coincidence begins to reveal itself as the natural result of causes that have been developing all along. I want you to consider something that quietly exists within everything in the universe. Every act of creation, whether in nature, in thought, or in human life, arises from the interaction of two complementary forces. These forces are often described as masculine and feminine principles, but I want you to understand that these terms do not refer to gender in the ordinary sense. They describe two fundamental modes of energy that exist within every person and every creative process. The law of generation explains that nothing can come into existence without the cooperation of these two principles. One initiates the direction of creation, and the other gives form and substance to it. Think about how creation occurs in nature. A seed contains the blueprint of a plant, but without fertile soil and nurturing conditions, that blueprint cannot grow. The seed represents the initiating impulse, while the soil provides the environment that allows the impulse to take form. Both are necessary. Without the seed, nothing begins. Without the soil, nothing develops. In the same way, the law of generation suggests that every creative outcome in life arises from a union between an initiating force and a receptive force. One directs the intention, and the other nurtures and shapes the manifestation of that intention. I want you to imagine these two principles operating inside your own mind. The masculine aspect of consciousness is associated with focus, intention, and decision. It is the part of you that chooses a direction. It forms ideas, sets goals, and declares what it wants to create. The feminine aspect of consciousness is associated with imagination, feeling, and receptivity. It receives the intention and allows it to grow into form. When these two aspects work together harmoniously, creation becomes possible. The intention plants a seed, and the imagination nourishes it until it becomes part of your lived experience. Many people unknowingly use only one side of this process. Some focus entirely on effort and logic. They try to force results through constant action and determination. While determination is important, action without imagination can become mechanical and exhausting. Others rely only on dreaming and imagining without forming clear intentions or taking practical steps. In that case, ideas remain abstract and never develop into reality. The law of generation reveals that true creation requires the union of both principles. The directing power of intention must meet the nurturing power of imagination. I want you to notice how this union appears in everyday creativity. When an artist begins a painting, there is first an idea or vision of what they want to express. That vision is the initiating force, but the painting does not appear instantly. The artist enters a receptive state where imagination guides the movement of the brush, the choice of color, and the gradual development of form. The same process occurs when an inventor designs a new technology. The intention to solve a problem initiates the process, and the imagination explores possibilities until a workable solution emerges. Every creative act involves a dialogue between direction and receptivity. This law also operates in the way you shape your life experiences. When you form a clear intention about the kind of life you want to live, you activate the initiating principle, but the process does not end there. The receptive principle then allows your imagination and emotions to interact with that intention. You begin to see possibilities where you did not see them before. Your perception changes. You notice opportunities that align with your intention. Gradually, your actions follow this new vision, and circumstances begin to reorganize around it. Creation unfolds as a partnership between the directing force of purpose and the receptive field of imagination. I want you to understand something important about imagination in this process. Imagination is not merely fantasy or entertainment. It is the field where possibilities take shape before they appear in physical form. Every building begins as an image in the mind of an architect. Every invention begins as an idea that someone dares to explore. When imagination receives a clear intention, it begins arranging mental images, emotions, and ideas that guide your actions. Over time, These inner patterns influence the decisions you make and the environments you create. Another way to understand this law is to think about the relationship between thought and feeling. Thought often represents the directing aspect of the mind. It decides what is desired and where attention should move. Feeling represents the receptive aspect that energizes the thought and allows it to become part of your deeper consciousness. When thought and feeling align, they create a powerful internal state. That state influences behavior, communication, and perception. When thought and feeling are in conflict, creation becomes difficult. For example, someone may think they want success but feel deep doubt about their abilities. In that case, the two forces pull in opposite directions, and the creative process becomes unstable. The law of generation invites you to bring these two principles into harmony. When your intention is clear and your imagination supports that intention with belief and emotion, the creative process becomes smoother. You begin to act with greater confidence because your inner world is aligned. Your thoughts and feelings move in the same direction. This alignment generates a kind of momentum that gradually expresses itself in the outer world. I want you to notice that this process does not remove effort from life. Creation still requires action, learning, and persistence. But when the inner union of intention and imagination exists, effort becomes more effective. Instead of pushing blindly against obstacles, you begin to move with a sense of purpose and clarity. Your actions feel connected to a deeper vision rather than scattered by uncertainty. The law of generation also reminds you that creativity is not limited to artists or inventors. Every person participates in the creative process simply by thinking, imagining, and making decisions each day. The environment you build around yourself is influenced by the ideas you nurture and the emotional atmosphere you cultivate. When intention and imagination work together, even small actions gain creative power. A conversation can open new possibilities. A decision can redirect the course of your future. A single idea can transform the way you approach challenges. Ultimately, the law of generation reveals that creation is not a solitary act of force. It is a partnership between two complementary energies within consciousness. The directing principle chooses the destination. The receptive principle gives life to the journey. When these two forces unite, ideas become experiences, and possibilities gradually take form in the world around you. I want you to begin by questioning one of the most common misunderstandings about the law of attraction. Many people believe that this law simply means asking the universe for what you want and waiting for it to appear. They imagine that repeating a wish or thinking about a goal long enough will somehow cause reality to rearrange itself instantly. But the deeper meaning of this law is far more subtle and far more powerful than that. The law of attraction is not about wishing for something outside of you. It is about becoming the kind of person whose internal state naturally resonates with the experience you desire. In other words, you do not attract what you merely want. You attract what you consistently are. I want you to think about the idea of frequency for a moment. Earlier, we explored the law of vibration, which explains that everything in the universe is moving and resonating at a certain energetic level. Your thoughts and emotions create a frequency that influences the way you perceive the world and the way the world responds to you. The law of attraction is a natural extension of that principle. It explains that similar frequencies tend to move toward one another, just as a radio receives the station that matches its tuning. Your internal state tends to align with experiences that resonate with the same emotional and mental patterns. Imagine someone who constantly feels unworthy of success. Even if that person says they want opportunity, their inner frequency may still be shaped by doubt or fear. When an opportunity appears, they may hesitate to pursue it. They may assume they are not ready, or they may expect rejection before they even try. Over time, their actions confirm the internal belief they already carry. From the outside, it may look like bad luck, but from the inside, it is the natural result of an internal state that does not yet resonate with the experience they desire. Now imagine someone who holds a quiet sense of possibility within themselves. This person may still encounter challenges, but their emotional orientation is different. When they see a chance to grow, they approach it with curiosity rather than hesitation. They are willing to take action even when the outcome is uncertain. because they move through the world with a different inner frequency. They notice opportunities that others overlook. They respond to situations with confidence rather than fear. Over time, their actions create results that reinforce the belief that progress is possible. I want you to understand that the law of attraction is not a mystical shortcut that eliminates effort. Instead, it describes how your internal state influences the direction of your actions and perceptions. When your thoughts and emotions align with a certain vision of life, your attention begins to filter the world in a way that supports that vision. You begin to notice ideas, people, and possibilities that match your inner orientation. The experiences that follow are not random gifts from the universe. They are the natural extension of the frequency you carry. Think about how this principle appears in everyday interactions. When someone enters a room feeling joyful and open, their presence often changes the atmosphere. Conversations become lighter. People respond with warmth. When someone enters the same room, carrying tension or negativity, the atmosphere can shift in the opposite direction. Others may become guarded or uncomfortable without fully understanding why. These reactions are not accidents. They are examples of how emotional frequency influences the environment around you. I want you to see that the law of attraction begins with identity rather than desire. When you focus only on what you want, without addressing the state of being that accompanies it, you create internal conflict. For example, someone may say they want financial abundance while constantly feeling anxious about money. The feeling of anxiety sends a different signal than the feeling of trust or confidence. As long as those two states exist in opposition, the frequency remains unstable. The law of attraction invites you to align your inner state with the reality you intend to experience. This alignment often begins with imagination and belief. When you imagine a future where your goals are already unfolding, you allow your mind to experience the emotions associated with that outcome. Those emotions begin to shift your internal frequency. Over time, the new emotional state influences the decisions you make and the opportunities you recognize. Your behavior changes subtly but consistently. You begin acting from a place of possibility rather than limitation. I want you to notice that this process unfolds gradually. It does not require dramatic gestures or unrealistic optimism. Small shifts in attention and perspective can begin to change your internal frequency. A moment of gratitude can redirect your focus from scarcity to appreciation. A decision to trust your ability to learn can transform fear into curiosity. Each of these shifts alters the emotional tone you bring into situations. As that tone changes, the experiences you encounter begin to change as well. Another important aspect of this law is authenticity. The frequency you carry cannot be faked for long. If you repeat positive words while secretly believing the opposite, your emotional state reveals the truth of your internal pattern. The law of attraction responds to the genuine state of your consciousness rather than the surface language you use. This is why self-awareness becomes so important. When you observe your thoughts and feelings honestly, you gain the ability to transform them. You may begin to realize that the law of attraction is less about controlling the universe and more about understanding your relationship with it. Your inner world interacts with the outer world through perception, behavior, and emotional energy. When those elements align with the life you wish to experience, the pathway toward that life becomes clearer. The opportunities that appear may still require effort and courage, but you will recognize them when they arrive. Ultimately, the law of attraction teaches you that the reality you desire begins as a state of being within you. When your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs resonate with that state, you become a natural match for experiences that reflect it. Instead of chasing the future from a place of lack, you begin to embody the qualities that allow the future to unfold through you. In this way, attraction becomes less about reaching for something distant and more about becoming the frequency of what you seek. I want you to begin by questioning one of the most familiar assumptions you have carried throughout your life. You look at the world and it appears divided into separate parts. You see yourself as one individual, other people as separate individuals, and the environment as something entirely outside of you. This perception of separation feels natural because your senses present reality in this way. Your eyes see objects that appear distinct from one another. Your body occupies a particular location in space. Your experiences seem to belong only to you. But the law of oneness invites you to look beyond the surface of perception and consider a deeper possibility. What if the boundaries you see are not the ultimate truth of reality, but only the way your senses organize experience? Imagine standing in the middle of the ocean and observing the waves. Each wave appears separate as it rises and falls. Some waves are large, others are small, and each one moves with its own shape and rhythm. If you focus only on the surface, it seems as though the waves are individual entities competing for space. But when you look deeper, you realize that every wave is made of the same water. The apparent separation exists only in form, not in substance. The ocean remains one continuous body even though countless waves move across its surface. In the same way, the law of oneness suggests that all existence arises from a single underlying field of consciousness. Individual forms appear separate, but the essence beneath them remains connected. I want you to consider how this idea changes the way you see yourself. If consciousness is the underlying field of reality, then your awareness is not an isolated phenomenon trapped inside your body. Instead, it is an expression of the same universal awareness that exists everywhere. The mind you experience as your mind is like a wave rising from the ocean of consciousness. It has a unique perspective and a unique shape, yet it is still made of the same substance as the larger whole. When you recognize this connection, the idea of absolute separation begins to dissolve. This law becomes clearer when you observe how deeply interconnected life already is. Every breath you take depends on the atmosphere of the planet. The oxygen in the air comes from trees and plants that transform sunlight into energy. The food you eat carries the energy of soil, water, and sunlight that existed long before you encountered it. Even your thoughts are influenced by ideas, language, and knowledge shared by countless other people throughout history. When you look closely, it becomes difficult to find anything that exists entirely on its own. Every part of life depends on relationships with other parts. The law of oneness does not deny individuality. Each person still has their own perspective, their own experiences, and their own path through life. But individuality exists within a larger unity. Just as different organs in the body perform different functions while still belonging to the same organism, individual lives contribute to a larger network of existence. When one part of that network changes, the effects ripple through the rest of the system. This is why actions often have consequences beyond what you immediately see. A small act of kindness can influence someone's day, which may influence their decisions, which may influence events that continue long after the original moment has passed. I want you to think about how this principle transforms the way you approach relationships with others. If separation is only a surface appearance, then every interaction becomes a meeting between different expressions of the same underlying consciousness. When you treat someone with compassion, you strengthen the atmosphere of connection that supports everyone. When you respond with hostility or indifference, that atmosphere becomes more tense and fragmented. The energy of your actions does not stop at the boundary of your own experience. It moves through the network of relationships that connects all living things. Another important aspect of this law is empathy. When you recognize that others share the same fundamental essence as you, their experiences begin to feel less distant. Their struggles become easier to understand. Their joys become easier to celebrate. Empathy grows naturally from the realization that the same life that animates you also animates them. This awareness does not erase differences in opinion or perspective, but it creates a deeper foundation for respect and cooperation. I want you to notice how often conflict arises from the illusion of separation. When people believe they exist in isolation, they begin to see others as competitors or obstacles. Fear of loss and scarcity grows stronger because each person appears to stand alone against the world. But when you recognize the interconnected nature of life, cooperation becomes more natural than competition. You begin to understand that supporting the well-being of others ultimately strengthens the environment in which you also live. The law of oneness also influences how you relate to the natural world. When the environment is treated as something separate from human life, it becomes easy to ignore the consequences of damaging it. But when you recognize that your existence is inseparable from the ecosystems that sustain you, the relationship changes. Protecting the balance of nature becomes an act of self-preservation as well as responsibility. The same principle applies to the social environments you participate in. The quality of your community reflects the collective attitudes and actions of its members. I want you to see that the law of oneness does not require mystical belief. It simply invites you to observe the patterns of connection that already exist. The more you examine reality, the more you see that boundaries are often practical distinctions rather than absolute divisions. Your body interacts with the environment through every breath and every movement. Your mind interacts with other minds through conversation, learning, and shared experience. Life unfolds as a continuous web of influence rather than a collection of isolated fragments. When you understand this law, your sense of identity expands. You still recognize your individuality, but you also see yourself as part of something larger. Your thoughts, actions, and intentions become contributions to a greater field of experience. This awareness naturally encourages responsibility and compassion. Instead of asking only how events affect you, you begin to ask how your choices influence the larger system of life. The illusion of separation begins to fade when you see the deeper unity beneath appearances. Just as every wave belongs to the same ocean, every individual expression of life arises from the same underlying source. Recognizing this connection changes the way you move through the world. It reminds you that every action sends ripples through the network of existence, and that the harmony you create within yourself has the power to resonate far beyond the boundaries you once believed defined you. I want you to consider a subtle but powerful idea. Most people spend their lives trying to reach a future that feels distant from their present reality. They imagine success somewhere ahead of them, happiness somewhere ahead of them, peace somewhere ahead of them. They look at their current circumstances and believe that once the outer world changes, then their inner state will change as well. But the law of assumption reverses this entire way of thinking. It suggests that the inner state must come first. Instead of waiting for reality to change before you feel successful, confident, or fulfilled, you begin by assuming that the desired state already exists within you. In other words, you learn to live from the end rather than constantly striving toward it. I want you to imagine how different this approach is from the way most people operate. When someone wants something deeply, they often focus on the absence of it. They think about how far away it seems. They notice every obstacle that appears to stand between them and their goal. Even when they are motivated, the emotional tone beneath their desire may still be one of lack or uncertainty. The law of assumption reveals that this state of mind quietly shapes the way reality unfolds. When you continually feel that something is missing, your awareness remains tuned to the experience of missing it. You may work hard, but the emotional signal behind your efforts still reflects distance rather than fulfillment. Now imagine approaching life from a different perspective. Instead of focusing on what you do not yet have, you begin by entering the mental and emotional state of the person who already possesses it. This does not mean pretending in a superficial way or denying the conditions around you. It means allowing your imagination and your feelings to experience the reality you desire as if it were already unfolding. You begin to think from the position of the fulfilled goal rather than from the position of striving toward it. I want you to notice something important here. Your mind already has the ability to create experiences internally. When you remember a powerful moment from the past, your body can feel the emotions associated with that memory, even though the event is not happening again in the present. Your imagination works in a similar way. When you vividly picture a future possibility, your emotional state begins to respond as if that possibility were real. The law of assumption uses this natural ability intentionally. By repeatedly imagining and feeling the reality of your desired outcome, you gradually shift your internal identity. Identity plays a central role in this process. Most people see themselves as the person they have been in the past. Their beliefs about themselves are shaped by previous experiences, successes, and failures. But the law of assumption invites you to step into a new identity before the outer evidence appears. If you want to become confident, you begin thinking and feeling from the perspective of someone who already carries confidence. If you want to create a new opportunity in life, you begin viewing the world through the eyes of someone who already expects possibility. Over time, This shift in identity influences the decisions you make and the way you interact with the world. I want you to understand that this principle does not mean ignoring practical action. Action remains essential. But when action arises from the assumption that your goal is already unfolding, the quality of that action changes. Instead of acting from desperation or pressure, you act from clarity and purpose. Your choices become aligned with the identity you have assumed. You naturally move toward environments and conversations that support that identity. In this way, the internal assumption becomes a guiding force that shapes the external path. Another reason this law is powerful is that it transforms the way you interpret obstacles. When you believe that your goal is still far away, every challenge can feel like evidence that success is unlikely. But when you assume that the desired outcome is already part of your reality, challenges become temporary details within a larger story that is already moving toward completion. You respond to difficulties with greater patience because your internal state remains anchored in the end result rather than in the temporary appearance of problems. I want you to think of the law of assumption as a shift in perspective rather than a magical technique. Instead of asking when something will finally arrive, you begin asking how the person who already has it would think, feel, and act today. This question redirects your attention from waiting to becoming. Each day becomes an opportunity to embody the qualities associated with your desired outcome. The more consistently you practice this perspective, the more natural it becomes. You may begin to notice that small changes in your internal assumptions influence the way people respond to you. When you approach a conversation believing you are capable and respected, your tone and body language reflect that belief. Others often respond differently because the energy you bring into the interaction has changed. The same principle applies to opportunities. When you assume that growth and progress are possible, you become more attentive to situations that support that expectation. Over time, these subtle shifts accumulate into meaningful changes in your experience. It is also important to remember that assumptions often operate quietly in the background of your mind. Many beliefs about yourself were formed long ago and have been repeated so often that they feel like facts. The law of assumption encourages you to examine these hidden patterns. If an old belief no longer supports the life you want to create, you can replace it with a new assumption that reflects your chosen direction. This process requires patience and consistency, but it gradually reshapes the inner foundation of your experience. The deeper message of this law is that reality often follows the identity you carry within. When you repeatedly assume a new state of being, your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to align with that state. The outer world may take time to adjust, but the transformation begins internally the moment you shift your assumption. Instead of waiting for the future to confirm your worth or your potential, you begin living from the end, where that potential is already real. In doing so, you allow your inner state to become the starting point from which the experiences of your life gradually unfold. I want you to notice something that often happens when people deeply want something. The more intensely they desire it, the more they think about it, worry about it, and measure the distance between their present reality and the future they hope for. They imagine success, yet at the same time they feel the pressure of not having it yet. This pressure creates tension in the mind and body. Instead of moving toward the desired experience with clarity, they begin chasing it with anxiety. The law of detachment begins with a paradox that may seem strange at first. Sometimes the moment you loosen your grip on what you want is the moment life begins moving it closer to you. I want you to understand that detachment does not mean indifference. It does not mean giving up on your dreams or pretending that your goals do not matter. Detachment simply means releasing the emotional tension that comes from believing your happiness depends entirely on a specific outcome. When desire turns into desperation, the mind becomes restless. It constantly checks whether the goal has appeared yet. It interprets every delay as a sign that something is wrong. This restless state creates an atmosphere of lack, and that atmosphere influences the way you perceive and respond to situations. Think about a simple example. Imagine holding a handful of sand in your palm. If you hold your hand gently, the sand remains in place, but if you squeeze your hand tightly, the sand slips through your fingers. Desire can behave in a similar way. When you hold your intention with calm confidence, your mind remains open and flexible. But when you grasp it with fear and urgency, your focus narrows and tension grows. The more you tighten your grip, the more energy you spend worrying about whether the outcome will happen. I want you to consider how this tension affects your awareness. When you are overly attached to a specific result, you often become blind to alternative possibilities. You may overlook opportunities that do not match the exact form you expected. You may misinterpret temporary delays as permanent obstacles. Your attention becomes fixed on one narrow path, and you forget that life often unfolds in ways you cannot predict in advance. Detachment allows your mind to remain open to the many ways a goal might take shape. Another important aspect of detachment is trust. Trust does not mean believing that everything will happen instantly or exactly as you imagine. It means understanding that the process of creation often unfolds gradually. When you trust the process, you no longer feel the need to control every step. You set your intention clearly, take meaningful action, and then allow space for events to develop in their own time. This balance between intention and patience creates a calmer state of mind, and that calmness allows you to respond to life more intelligently. I want you to think about moments in your life when something arrived unexpectedly after you stopped obsessing about it. Perhaps you were searching for an answer to a problem and could not find it despite intense effort. Then, when you relaxed and turned your attention elsewhere, the solution appeared naturally. This pattern happens because a relaxed mind is more receptive. When tension disappears, your awareness becomes more flexible and creative. The law of detachment works in a similar way. By releasing the constant pressure around your desires, you create space for solutions and opportunities to emerge. Detachment also protects you from becoming emotionally dependent on a single outcome. When you believe that your happiness can only come from one specific result, you give that result enormous power over your emotional state. Every delay feels painful, and every small setback feels discouraging. But when you remain detached, your sense of well-being does not collapse simply because something takes time to develop. You continue moving forward with curiosity rather than fear. I want you to understand that detachment works hand in hand with the other principles we have explored. When you assume the identity of someone who already lives with confidence and possibility, you do not cling to outcomes in desperation. Instead, you act from a place of inner stability. Your focus shifts from forcing results to embodying the qualities that naturally produce them. In this state, action becomes purposeful but relaxed. You move toward your goals without the constant pressure of proving something to yourself or to others. Another way to understand detachment is through the rhythm of effort and release. Creation often involves a period of focused action followed by a period of allowing. A musician practices intensely to master a piece of music, but during the performance they must release control and trust their training. A writer may concentrate deeply while composing ideas, but insight often arrives during quiet moments when the mind is not forcing it. The same pattern appears in many areas of life. Effort prepares the conditions, and release allows the results to unfold. I want you to notice that detachment also strengthens resilience. When you are not emotionally trapped by a single outcome, you can adapt more easily when circumstances change. If one path closes, you remain open to discovering another. This flexibility often leads to outcomes that are even better than the original plan. By releasing rigid expectations, you allow life to reveal possibilities that might have remained hidden otherwise. The law of detachment does not ask you to stop caring about what you want. Instead, it invites you to care in a different way. You hold your vision clearly, but you release the anxiety that comes from trying to control every detail of how and when it will appear. You trust that your efforts, combined with the natural unfolding of life, will guide you toward the experiences that belong in your path. Ultimately, detachment is a form of inner freedom. It allows you to pursue your goals with passion while remaining peaceful regardless of temporary outcomes. When you release the grip of desperate desire, you step into a state of balance. Your intentions remain strong. Your actions remain purposeful, but your mind becomes calm and open. In that openness, opportunities often appear in ways that feel almost effortless, because the energy that once created tension has been transformed into clarity and trust. I want you to imagine holding a cup under a stream of fresh water. If the cup is already filled with something old, cloudy, or stagnant. The new water cannot truly enter. It simply spills over the edge while the contents inside remain unchanged. The law of forgiveness works in a similar way. Many people seek growth, peace, opportunity, and abundance in their lives, yet they continue carrying the emotional weight of resentment, anger, or regret. These emotions become like the stagnant water in the cup. As long as they remain inside, they occupy the space where something new could enter. Forgiveness is the act of emptying that vessel so that life can flow through it again. I want you to understand something important at the beginning. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people believe that forgiving someone means approving of what they did or pretending that the pain never happened. But that is not what forgiveness truly means. Forgiveness does not erase the past or deny the reality of what occurred. Instead, it releases the emotional chain that keeps you tied to that moment. When you hold resentment for a long time, the memory of the event continues to live inside your mind. It shapes the way you see people, the way you interpret situations, and sometimes even the way you see yourself. Forgiveness breaks that chain. It allows the past to remain in the past rather than repeating itself in your present awareness. Think about how the mind holds on to painful experiences when someone feels betrayed, disappointed, or hurt. The mind often replays the memory again and again. Each time the memory returns, the emotional energy attached to it becomes stronger. Over time, that energy can influence your beliefs about the world. You may begin to expect similar experiences in the future. You may become cautious, guarded, or distant in relationships. What began as a single event slowly becomes part of your identity. The law of forgiveness offers a way to release that pattern. It allows you to remember the lesson without continuing to carry the emotional burden. I want you to consider how forgiveness transforms your internal state. When resentment fades, the mind becomes lighter and more open. The emotional space that was once occupied by anger or regret becomes available for something new. Creativity returns more easily. Compassion grows stronger. Your perception of others becomes less filtered by past wounds. In this sense, forgiveness is not just an emotional act, it is also a practical one. It frees mental and emotional energy that can now be directed toward growth and possibility. Forgiveness also applies to yourself. Many people carry hidden guilt about decisions they made years ago. They replay old mistakes and imagine how life might have been different if they had acted another way. This habit creates a quiet form of self-judgment that influences confidence and self-worth. The law of forgiveness reminds you that growth requires compassion for your past self. The person you were in an earlier moment acted with the understanding and awareness available at that time. When you learn from those experiences and release the guilt attached to them, you allow yourself to move forward with greater clarity. I want you to see how forgiveness changes the way you interact with others. When resentment fades, communication becomes easier. You listen more openly. You respond with curiosity rather than suspicion. Relationships that once felt tense may gradually soften. Even when you choose not to continue certain relationships, forgiveness allows you to step away without carrying bitterness. Your peace no longer depends on holding someone accountable in your mind. Instead, it comes from releasing the emotional tie that kept the past alive within you. Another important aspect of forgiveness is the way it influences the atmosphere around you. Emotions do not remain contained inside a person. They shape tone, behavior, and the subtle signals that people communicate without words. When someone carries unresolved anger, it often appears in their expressions, their reactions, and the way they interpret situations. When forgiveness replaces that anger, the emotional atmosphere changes. Others respond differently because the energy of the interaction has shifted. I want you to imagine forgiveness as opening a window in a room that has been closed for a long time. Fresh air begins to circulate. The heaviness that once filled the space slowly disappears. In the same way, releasing resentment allows new experiences to enter your life. Opportunities that once felt distant become easier to recognize because your attention is no longer consumed by past conflicts. Your mind becomes more receptive to the present moment. Forgiveness does not happen instantly for everyone. Sometimes the process unfolds gradually. You may begin by acknowledging the pain you experienced rather than pretending it never existed. Then you allow yourself to see the situation from a wider perspective. You recognize that every person acts according to their level of awareness, their fears, and their understanding at the time. This perspective does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps you understand that holding resentment indefinitely does not change the past. It only prolongs its influence in your present life. The law of forgiveness also connects to the principle of abundance. When your mind is filled with unresolved emotions, it becomes difficult to notice new opportunities or appreciate the resources already present in your life. By releasing these emotional burdens, you clear the space where gratitude and creativity can grow. This shift in awareness allows you to see possibilities that were previously hidden behind the shadow of old experiences. I want you to recognize that forgiveness is ultimately an act of freedom. It returns control of your emotional life to you. Instead of allowing past events to dictate your present state, you choose to release their hold. This decision does not erase history, but it transforms your relationship with it. The past becomes a teacher rather than a prison. When the vessel of the mind is emptied of resentment and regret, something remarkable happens. Clarity begins to replace confusion. Compassion begins to replace bitterness. Possibility begins to replace limitation. In this open space, life can flow again, bringing new experiences that reflect the lighter state of your awareness. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not only about healing old wounds, it is also about preparing the inner space where abundance, peace, and new beginnings can finally take root. I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on everything you have encountered so far. You have explored powerful ideas about the nature of reality, the movement of consciousness, the relationship between inner states and outer experiences, and the quiet laws that shape the unfolding of life. But there is something important you must understand now. Knowledge alone does not transform reality. Understanding a principle intellectually is very different from living it. Many people read about powerful ideas, feel inspired for a short time, and then return to the same habits of thinking and reacting that shaped their past. The awakening of the operator begins at the moment when knowledge stops being information and becomes something you actively practice. I want you to imagine a complex instrument placed in front of someone who has never used it before. They may study its design, learn the names of its parts, and understand how it functions in theory. But until they begin touching the keys, turning the controls, and experimenting with its possibilities, the instrument remains silent. The same is true for the principles you have been learning. These ideas describe how consciousness interacts with reality, but they only begin to reveal their power when you start applying them in your daily life. The awakening of the operator is the moment you realize that you are not merely observing these laws from the outside, you are participating in them. I want you to see yourself as the operator of your own awareness. Your thoughts, emotions, and assumptions are not random events that appear without influence. They are patterns that can be observed and gradually directed. When you begin noticing how your inner state changes your perception of the world, you step into a new role. Instead of reacting automatically to every situation, you begin to choose how you respond internally. This shift may seem subtle at first, but it changes the direction of your entire experience. Think about how often people move through life on automatic patterns. A challenging situation appears, and the mind instantly reacts with worry or frustration. A criticism appears, and the mind reacts with defensiveness. These reactions happen so quickly that they feel inevitable. But when awareness becomes stronger, a small space begins to appear between the event and the reaction. In that space, you gain the ability to choose a different response. The awakening of the operator happens in that moment of awareness. I want you to consider how this applies to the laws you have explored. When you understand the law of mentalism, you recognize that the state of your mind influences the world you experience. When you understand the law of correspondence, you see that your inner beliefs often reflect themselves in your external environment. When you understand the law of vibration and attraction, you begin noticing how emotional states influence opportunities and interactions. But these laws remain abstract ideas until you consciously observe them in action within your own life. Practice begins with attention. You start by noticing the patterns of your thoughts and emotions without immediately judging them. Instead of being carried away by every reaction, you observe the way certain beliefs repeat themselves. You notice how specific emotions influence your decisions. This awareness allows you to interrupt patterns that no longer serve you. Over time, you begin replacing them with new patterns that reflect the life you want to create. I want you to understand that this process does not require perfection. No one maintains complete awareness every moment of the day. The mind naturally drifts between focus and distraction. What matters is the willingness to return to awareness again and again, each time you notice an old pattern, and gently redirect your attention. You strengthen the role of the operator within you. Gradually, the new pattern becomes more natural than the old one. Another important part of practice is imagination. Earlier, you explored how imagination allows you to experience possibilities before they appear in physical form. When you consciously imagine the life you intend to create, you begin shaping the emotional atmosphere within your mind. That atmosphere influences your confidence, your creativity, and your openness to opportunity. The operator uses imagination as a tool for directing attention toward the experiences they wish to cultivate. Action also becomes part of this awakening. As your internal state changes, your behavior begins to shift. You may notice yourself responding to challenges with curiosity rather than fear. You may begin speaking with more clarity about your intentions. Small actions taken from a different state of mind can gradually change the direction of your environment. The operator understands that inner alignment and outer actions support each other. One without the other remains incomplete. I want you to think about this awakening as a gradual transition rather than a sudden transformation. At first, the difference between reacting automatically and responding consciously may appear only in small moments. You might notice yourself pausing before responding to a difficult conversation. You might choose to redirect your attention away from worry toward a more constructive thought. These small decisions accumulate over time. As they do, your sense of personal agency becomes stronger. There is also a sense of responsibility that comes with this awareness. When you recognize that your inner patterns influence your experiences, it becomes difficult to blame every circumstance on forces outside of you. This does not mean ignoring the complexity of life or the influence of external conditions, but it does mean acknowledging the role you play in shaping your perception and response. The operator accepts that their awareness is a powerful instrument that must be used carefully. I want you to realize that the awakening of the operator is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a deeper relationship with your own consciousness. The more you practice observing and directing your inner state, the more clearly you see how the principles you have learned operate within everyday experiences. Life itself becomes the classroom where these ideas reveal their meaning. As you move forward, remember that knowledge becomes powerful only when it enters your actions, your habits, and your awareness of the present moment. The laws you have explored are not distant philosophical concepts. They are living patterns that interact with your thoughts, emotions, and decisions every day. When you begin applying them with patience and curiosity, you step fully into the role of the operator. And in that role, you discover that the most important instrument you will ever learn to use is the awareness through which you experience the world. I want you to understand something that many people overlook when they encounter ideas about consciousness and the hidden structure of reality. Concepts can be fascinating. They can sound profound and inspiring. But if they remain only ideas in your mind, they will eventually fade like any other interesting thought. Real understanding begins when you move beyond theory and begin testing these principles within your own experience. The moment you do this, the conversation about these laws changes completely. They stop being abstract philosophies and start becoming tools that reveal themselves through direct observation. Think about how you learned the most important skills in your life. You did not learn to walk by reading instructions. You did not learn to speak by memorizing rules about language. You learned through interaction with reality itself. You tried, adjusted, tried again, and gradually the ability became natural. The same process applies to the principles you have been exploring. They are not meant to remain ideas you admire from a distance. They are meant to be explored, tested, and refined through the laboratory of your daily life. I want you to begin with a simple realization. Every day already contains countless opportunities to observe these laws in motion. You do not need special equipment or dramatic circumstances. All you need is awareness. When you pay attention to how your thoughts influence your emotions, you are observing the law of mentalism. When you notice how your inner mood shapes the way you interpret events, you are observing correspondence. When you feel how certain environments or conversations affect your energy, you are observing vibration. Life constantly provides examples of these patterns, but most people move through their days too quickly to notice them. Testing these laws begins with curiosity rather than blind belief. You do not have to accept every idea immediately. Instead, you approach them like a careful observer. When a new thought appears in your mind, you notice the emotional state it creates. When you change your focus from worry to possibility, you watch how your perception of the same situation shifts. Over time, you begin to see that your inner state acts like a lens through which the world is interpreted. I want you to try something simple the next time you encounter a challenge. Instead of reacting instantly with frustration, pause for a moment. Observe the thoughts that appear in your mind. Notice the emotional tone they carry. Then experiment with a different perspective. Ask yourself how the situation might look if you approached it with curiosity instead of resistance. You may discover that the environment around you does not change immediately, but your relationship to it changes. That shift in relationship often reveals options that were invisible before. Another way to test these principles is through imagination. Choose a small goal or intention. It does not need to be dramatic. Perhaps it is the intention to approach a conversation with confidence or to complete a task with clarity and focus. Spend a few moments imagining the situation unfolding in a positive and relaxed way. Allow your mind to feel the atmosphere of that outcome as if it were already happening. Then move into the situation and observe what occurs. You may find that your tone, posture, and attention naturally align with the state you imagined. This simple experiment demonstrates how inner preparation influences outer behavior. I want you to remember that testing these laws is not about forcing results. It is about observing patterns. Sometimes your experiments will confirm the principles quickly. Other times the results may be subtle or delayed. The value of testing lies in the awareness you gain during the process. You begin to see how thoughts, emotions, and actions form a continuous loop of influence. Instead of seeing life as a series of random events, you start recognizing the quiet connections that shape experience. Another important part of this testing process is patience. Many people approach these ideas with great excitement at first, but they quickly become discouraged if dramatic changes do not appear immediately. Real transformation often unfolds gradually. Just as physical training strengthens the body over time, mental and emotional training strengthens awareness through repeated practice. Each small experiment adds another layer of understanding. Over weeks and months, these insights accumulate into a deeper sense of clarity. I want you to think of yourself as both the observer and the participant in this experiment. On one level, you are watching how your thoughts and emotions influence your experiences. On another level, you are actively shaping those thoughts and emotions through your choices. This dual role creates a powerful form of learning. Instead of being controlled entirely by circumstances, you begin exploring how your inner state interacts with them. You may also notice that your awareness expands beyond personal experiences. When you observe conversations between other people, you may begin seeing the same patterns at work. The emotional tone of a room can shift when someone brings calmness or tension into the space. A hopeful perspective can inspire action, while a fearful perspective can restrict it. These patterns appear everywhere once you begin looking for them. Testing the laws through direct experience eventually leads to a deeper confidence. This confidence does not come from belief alone. It comes from observation. You see the principles operating repeatedly in small and large ways. You notice how subtle shifts in thought influence the way events unfold. You begin trusting your ability to guide your attention and emotional state more intentionally. I want you to realize that the purpose of this testing is not to control every aspect of life. Life will always contain elements that remain unpredictable. The purpose is to understand your role within the larger movement of reality. When you see how your awareness interacts with the world around you, you gain the ability to participate in that movement with greater clarity Direct experience transforms knowledge into wisdom. It moves ideas from the level of theory into the level of lived understanding. Each observation, each experiment, and each moment of awareness becomes part of a larger discovery about how consciousness shapes experience. Over time, you begin to see that the principles you once studied as abstract laws are actually living patterns woven into every moment of life. I want you to look carefully at one of the most powerful stories a human mind can create. It is a story that often begins quietly and grows stronger over time until it feels completely real. The story says that life is happening to you. It says that circumstances control your direction, that other people hold the power over your opportunities, and that the events of the past have already defined what the future will allow. When this story becomes part of someone's identity, they begin to see themselves as a victim of the world around them. They may not always use that word, but the pattern is the same. Life appears as something unpredictable and often unfair, and the individual feels as though they are constantly reacting to forces they cannot influence. I want you to understand that the victim identity does not always appear in dramatic ways. Sometimes it hides inside subtle thoughts. It may sound like the quiet belief that nothing ever works out for you. It may appear as the assumption that other people always have the advantage. It may emerge as the habit of explaining every disappointment by blaming circumstances beyond your control. These thoughts can become so familiar that they feel like facts rather than interpretations. Over time, they shape the way you see yourself and the way you interpret every new experience. Think about how identity works in the mind. When you repeat a certain story about yourself long enough, your perception begins to filter reality through that story. If you believe you are powerless, you will notice every event that confirms that belief. You will remember the moments when things did not work out and overlook the moments when you influenced your situation successfully. Your attention becomes trained to search for evidence that supports the identity you already are. I want you to imagine how different life looks when this identity begins to collapse. The collapse does not mean denying that challenges exist. Difficult events, unfair situations, and unexpected losses are real parts of life. The collapse simply means recognizing that your interpretation of these events determines the role you play in response to them. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who is only acted upon, you begin to see yourself as someone who can respond creatively. This shift often begins with awareness. You start noticing the language you use when describing your experiences. Pay attention to how often the mind explains events by saying something like, "That always happens to me," or "There is nothing I can do about it." These phrases may seem harmless, but they reinforce the belief that your influence is limited. The moment you begin questioning these patterns, a small opening appears in your awareness. You start asking a different question. Instead of asking why something happened to you, you ask how you might respond to it differently. I want you to see that this question changes everything. When you ask how you might respond, your mind begins searching for possibilities rather than explanations. Even in situations where your control is limited, there is always a choice about how you interpret and respond to the experience. This choice may appear small at first, but it gradually changes the way you see yourself. You begin moving from the identity of someone who is acted upon to the identity of someone who participates in shaping the direction of events. Another important aspect of the victim identity is emotional attachment to past experiences. When a painful memory remains unresolved, the mind may return to it again and again. Each time the memory is replayed, the emotional intensity grows stronger. Over time, the past becomes a lens through which the present is interpreted. A new situation that only slightly resembles the old one can trigger the same emotional reaction. The collapse of the victim identity begins when you realize that holding on to the past in this way keeps you connected to it far longer than necessary. I want you to understand that letting go of the victim identity does not mean blaming yourself for every event in your life. Responsibility and blame are not the same thing. Blame keeps your attention fixed on the past, searching for someone or something to accuse. Responsibility directs your attention toward the present, asking what you can do now with the situation in front of you. When you accept responsibility for your responses, you reclaim the energy that was once trapped in frustration. Think about how empowering this shift can be. When you believe that life controls you completely, every obstacle appears overwhelming. But when you recognize that your interpretation and response shape the meaning of events, challenges begin to look different. They become situations that require creativity rather than evidence of defeat. Even when you cannot change the circumstances immediately, you can still influence the direction of your actions and the perspective you bring into the situation. I want you to notice that the collapse of the victim identity often happens gradually. It rarely disappears all at once. Instead, it weakens each time you choose awareness over automatic reaction. Each time you notice an old story appearing in your mind and gently question it, the pattern loses a little more of its power. Over time, a new identity begins to form. This identity is not based on perfection or control. It is based on participation. Participation means recognizing that you are part of the unfolding process of life. Your thoughts influence your emotional state. Your emotional state influences your behavior. Your behavior influences the opportunities you encounter and the relationships you build. The more clearly you see these connections, the less convincing the victim story becomes. I want you to remember that the collapse of the victim identity is not the loss of something valuable. It is the release of a story that kept your awareness confined. When that story fades, a new perspective becomes possible. You begin to see yourself not as someone trapped inside circumstances, but as someone capable of interacting with them creatively. And in that moment, something important changes within you. The energy that once fueled frustration and helplessness becomes available for curiosity, learning, and growth. The world around you may still contain uncertainty, but your role within it becomes clearer. Instead of waiting for life to change before you feel empowered, you discover that empowerment begins with the simple recognition that your awareness and your choices always remain part of the unfolding story. I want you to step back for a moment and look at your life from a wider perspective. Up to this point, you have explored ideas about how consciousness interacts with reality, how inner states influence outer experiences, and how identity can shift from passive reaction to active participation. But now something deeper begins to emerge. When awareness expands enough, you start to see yourself in three interconnected roles at the same time. You are the creator, the alchemist, and the observer. These three aspects exist within you constantly, even if you have not noticed them before. Let us begin with the role of the creator. Every moment of your life contains acts of creation, even if they appear small or ordinary. The thoughts you repeat shape the atmosphere of your mind. The beliefs you accept influence the decisions you make. The decisions you make influence the path your life takes. When you speak, act, imagine, or focus your attention, you are participating in a creative process. Creation does not always mean producing something physical like a building or a painting. Sometimes creation happens through a shift in perception that changes the direction of your experience. I want you to notice how easily this creative power is overlooked. Many people imagine creation as something reserved for artists, inventors, or entrepreneurs. But the deeper form of creation occurs in the way you interpret events and respond to them. Two people may face the same situation and experience completely different outcomes because their perspectives guide them toward different actions. In that sense, perception itself becomes a form of creative influence. Now consider the role of the alchemist. In ancient traditions, alchemy was often described as the process of transforming ordinary metals into gold. But the symbolic meaning of alchemy goes much deeper. It refers to the transformation of raw experience into wisdom and understanding. Life constantly presents you with situations that contain both difficulty and possibility. The alchemist within you learns how to convert those experiences into growth rather than resentment. Think about how emotional reactions work. When something unexpected happens, your first reaction may be frustration or disappointment. If that reaction remains unchanged, the experience can become a source of stress that lingers in your memory. But when the alchemist within you becomes active, the same experience begins to transform. Instead of asking why the situation occurred, you begin asking what it can teach you. The emotional energy that once fueled frustration becomes fuel for insight. In this way, alchemy is not about avoiding difficulty, but about transforming its meaning. I want you to see how powerful this transformation can become. Every challenge contains information. Every mistake contains a lesson about how to move differently next time. When the alchemist perspective becomes natural, setbacks stop appearing as permanent failures. They become raw material that can be refined into understanding. This shift alone can dramatically change the way you approach life. Now let us consider the third role, the observer. The observer is the quiet awareness that notices your thoughts, emotions, and reactions without immediately becoming entangled in them. When you observe your own mind, you begin to see that thoughts appear and disappear like clouds moving across the sky. Emotions rise and fall like waves in the ocean. The observer remains present while these movements occur. I want you to understand why this role is so important. Without the observer, you become completely identified with every thought that passes through your mind. If a fearful thought appears, you immediately believe it. If an angry reaction arises, you assume it defines your entire state of being. But when the observer becomes active, a small space appears between your awareness and the thoughts moving through it. In that space, you gain the ability to choose your response. The observer allows you to see your creative and alchemical powers more clearly. When you observe your thoughts, you can decide which ones deserve attention and which ones can be released. When you observe your emotional reactions, you can transform them rather than being controlled by them. The observer acts like a steady center that allows the other two roles to function more effectively. I want you to imagine these three aspects working together. The creator shapes intention and direction. The alchemist transforms experience into wisdom. The observer maintains awareness so that reactions do not control the process. When these three aspects operate in harmony, life becomes less chaotic and more intentional. You begin to feel that you are participating in the unfolding of events rather than simply reacting to them. Consider how this changes your experience of daily life. A conversation that once triggered frustration can become an opportunity to practice observation. A mistake that once caused self-criticism can become material for alchemical transformation. A new idea that appears in your mind can become the seed of creative action. Instead of moving through the day automatically, you begin to engage with each moment more consciously. I want you to remember that these roles do not require perfection. There will still be moments when emotions rise quickly or when old habits return. The purpose is not to eliminate every reaction, but to recognize them sooner and respond with greater awareness. Each time you remember your role as creator, alchemist, and observer, the pattern becomes stronger. Over time, this awareness begins to influence the way you see the world around you. Situations that once appeared random begin to reveal patterns of cause and response. Emotional reactions that once felt overwhelming become easier to understand. Opportunities for creativity appear in places where you previously saw only routine. The deeper message of this realization is simple but powerful. Your life is not only a sequence of external events, it is also a process of inner participation. Every moment invites you to create meaning, transform experience, and observe the unfolding of consciousness within you. When you recognize these roles as part of your identity, something shifts in the way you move through the world. Instead of feeling like a passenger carried by circumstances, you begin to experience yourself as an active participant in the flow of life. The creator directs your intention, the alchemist refines your experiences into wisdom, and the observer holds the quiet awareness that keeps the entire process balanced. In that union of roles, you discover a deeper relationship with the unfolding story of your life. I want you to begin by recognizing something that quietly influences almost every decision a person makes. Beneath many choices, reactions, and habits, there is often one powerful emotion guiding the direction of thought. That emotion is fear. Fear can appear in many forms. Sometimes it arrives as worry about the future. Sometimes it appears as doubt about your abilities. Other times it hides inside the need for approval or the hesitation to take a step that feels uncertain. Fear is not always loud. Often it speaks in a soft voice that says it is safer to remain exactly where you are. Fear exists for a reason. It developed as a protective mechanism that helped human beings survive in uncertain environments. When danger appeared, fear activated the body's ability to react quickly. But in the modern world, fear often responds not to immediate physical danger, but to imagined possibilities. The mind projects scenarios that have not yet happened, and the body reacts as if they are real. When this pattern repeats often enough, fear becomes a habit of perception rather than a response to an actual threat. I want you to notice how fear influences your awareness. When fear dominates the mind, attention becomes narrow. The mind begins searching for evidence that confirms the danger it imagines. It focuses on what might go wrong rather than what might become possible. This pattern can quietly shape your identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone capable of navigating uncertainty, you begin to see yourself as someone who must constantly avoid it. But something important happens when awareness begins to grow. You start to recognize fear not as an unchangeable authority, but as a signal that can be observed. The moment you see fear clearly, a small space appears between you and the emotion. In that space, you discover the ability to respond differently. Rising above fear does not mean eliminating it completely. It means learning to see it without allowing it to determine your direction. I want you to imagine standing near the edge of the ocean at night. The waves move continuously, and the darkness makes it difficult to see the horizon. In the distance, there is a lighthouse standing on a rocky shore. The lighthouse does not control the ocean. It does not stop the waves or calm the wind. Its purpose is something simpler and more powerful. It shines a steady light that helps travelers navigate through the darkness. When you rise above fear, you become like that lighthouse. You do not remove uncertainty from life, but you become a steady source of clarity within it. Think about how this clarity influences the way you interact with others. When someone operates from fear, their energy often spreads tension through conversations and environments. Doubt becomes contagious. Hesitation becomes a shared atmosphere. But when someone carries calm awareness in the presence of uncertainty, the effect can be very different. Their presence reminds others that stability is possible, even when the situation is unclear. In this way, rising above fear allows you to influence your surroundings in subtle but meaningful ways. I want you to understand that courage does not appear suddenly as a dramatic moment of heroism. Courage often begins as a quiet decision. It is the choice to move forward, even when the mind is still uncertain. Each time you act with awareness rather than fear, you strengthen your ability to remain steady in future situations. Over time, the balance shifts. Fear may still appear, but it no longer controls the direction of your actions. Another important aspect of becoming a lighthouse is perspective. Fear often magnifies the importance of immediate problems. It convinces the mind that the current challenge defines everything. But when you step back and observe the larger pattern of your life, you begin to see that most difficulties are temporary phases rather than permanent barriers. The perspective of the lighthouse allows you to see the horizon even when the waves are moving around you. I want you to consider how this perspective changes the way you approach challenges. Instead of asking how to avoid uncertainty, you begin asking how to navigate it with awareness. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions before taking action, you move forward with the understanding that clarity often emerges through the process itself. Each step reveals new information that was invisible before the movement began. The transformation from fear to clarity also influences the people around you. When others see someone acting with calm determination, they often begin questioning their own assumptions about what is possible. Your example becomes a quiet form of guidance. Just as a lighthouse helps ships navigate without speaking a single word, your steadiness can inspire others to move beyond their own hesitation. I want you to remember that becoming a lighthouse does not require perfection. There will still be moments when uncertainty returns and fear appears again. What matters is your relationship with those moments. Instead of being pulled completely into the emotion, you learn to observe it and continue moving with awareness. Each time you do this, the light of your awareness grows stronger. Over time, this light begins to illuminate more than just your own path. Your presence becomes a reminder that fear does not have to dominate every decision. It shows that calmness can exist even when the future is unknown. In a world where many people move quickly from one worry to another, the steadiness of a clear mind becomes surprisingly powerful. I want you to see that rising above fear is not about becoming invulnerable. It is about discovering that awareness itself is stronger than the emotions that pass through it. When you stand in that awareness, you become less reactive and more intentional. The storms of life may still appear, but they no longer determine your direction. And this is where the true meaning of the lighthouse emerges. The light does not remove the darkness of the night. It simply shines clearly enough to reveal the path forward. In the same way, when you rise above fear and stand in awareness, you become a point of clarity in a world that often feels uncertain. Your presence reminds both yourself and others that even in the midst of movement and change, a steady light can always be found. I want you to consider something that most people rarely notice, even though it quietly shapes the entire direction of their lives. Almost everyone spends a large portion of their attention somewhere other than the present moment. The mind drifts backward into memories of what has already happened, replaying past conversations, regrets, or missed opportunities. Or it rushes forward into imagined futures, worrying about what might go wrong or hoping for what might finally arrive. In both cases, the mind moves away from the only place where real influence actually exists. The present moment is the only point where your awareness, your decisions, and your actions can truly interact with reality. Think about how often the past seems to control the way people see themselves. A mistake that happened years ago can still influence how someone feels today. A criticism from long ago can still echo in the mind whenever a new challenge appears. The past becomes a reference point that defines identity. But when you look closely, you realize something important. The past does not exist anywhere except in memory. It is a collection of images and interpretations that your mind can revisit, but it has no physical presence in the moment you are living right now. The future works in a similar way. People imagine possibilities that have not yet appeared and treat them as if they were already real. Sometimes the imagination creates hopeful visions, but very often it creates worry. The mind predicts problems that may never occur and responds emotionally as though those events are already unfolding. Hours or even years can be spent anticipating a future that exists only as an idea. Meanwhile, the present moment, where real choices can be made, passes quietly by. I want you to see why the present moment holds such power. It is the point where awareness and action meet. You cannot change something that already happened yesterday, and you cannot directly act in a future that has not yet arrived. But you can think, feel, decide, and move in this moment. The quality of your attention right now influences the direction of your next step. That next step influences the events that follow. In this way, the present moment becomes the place where the chain of cause and effect begins. Imagine holding a steering wheel while driving a car. You cannot steer the road behind you because it has already passed. You cannot steer the distant horizon because you have not reached it yet. The only place where the wheel responds to your hands is the point where you are currently driving. In the same way, your attention in the present moment guides the direction of your life. When awareness is scattered between past regrets and future worries, the steering wheel becomes loose in your hands. But when your attention returns to the moment you are living, clarity begins to return. I want you to notice how the present moment also changes your relationship with fear. Fear often depends on imagined futures. The mind creates scenarios that feel threatening, even though they have not actually occurred. When your attention returns to the present, you often discover that the immediate moment is much simpler than the imagined future suggested. There may be challenges, but they exist as practical situations rather than endless possibilities of disaster. By focusing on the present step instead of the distant outcome, fear begins to lose some of its power. Another important aspect of the present moment is awareness itself. When you pay attention to what is happening right now, you begin noticing details that normally escape your mind. You notice the tone of your thoughts. You notice how your body responds to stress or calmness. You notice the environment around you with greater clarity. This awareness allows you to adjust your responses more intelligently. Instead of reacting automatically, you gain the ability to pause and choose the direction of your attention. I want you to understand that living in the present moment does not mean ignoring the past or refusing to plan for the future. The past can offer valuable lessons, and the future can provide direction. But both of these functions only become useful when they return to the present moment. You remember the past in order to learn from it now. You imagine the future in order to guide the actions you take today. Without returning to the present moment, both memory and imagination lose their practical value. The present moment also strengthens creativity. When your mind is fully engaged with what is happening right now, ideas often emerge naturally. Solutions to problems appear more easily because your attention is not divided between conflicting thoughts. Artists, athletes, and scientists often describe moments of intense focus where time seems to slow down and awareness becomes completely absorbed in the activity at hand. In those moments, the mind is fully present, and creativity flows more freely. I want you to consider how small moments of presence can change the atmosphere of your day. A conversation becomes more meaningful when you listen fully, rather than thinking about what to say next. A task becomes clearer when your attention is not distracted by several other worries. Even simple experiences, like walking or breathing, become opportunities to reconnect with the quiet stability of the present moment. Over time, these moments of awareness begin to accumulate. The more often you return your attention to the present, the more natural it becomes. You start noticing when your mind drifts into unnecessary worry or regret, and you gently bring it back. This practice does not remove every difficulty from life, but it strengthens your ability to respond with clarity instead of confusion. The deeper realization behind this practice is that the present moment is not just a brief point between past and future. It is the living space where consciousness interacts with reality. Every thought you choose, every emotion you cultivate, and every action you take begins here. The past has already been shaped by previous moments like this one, and the future will grow from the moments that follow. I want you to remember that the power of the present moment is not dramatic or loud. It works quietly through attention. Each time you bring your awareness back to what is happening right now, you reclaim a small piece of clarity. And when enough of those moments accumulate, something remarkable begins to happen. Life no longer feels like something rushing past you uncontrollably. Instead, you begin to experience each moment as the place where your awareness and your choices gently shape the path ahead. I want you to arrive with me at a quiet realization. Everything we have explored together has been pointing toward a single understanding. The laws you have encountered were never meant to remain ideas in a book or interesting theories inside the mind. They were invitations. Invitations to see reality differently. Invitations to recognize the role your awareness plays in shaping your experience. And now we arrive at the moment where the final question appears. If these principles are real, what will you do with them? Many people spend their lives standing in front of a door without realizing it can be opened. They wait for someone else to unlock it. They assume the key belongs to authority, to luck, or to circumstances outside of their control. But the truth that slowly reveals itself through awareness is much simpler. The door has never been locked. The only thing that kept it closed was the belief that it could not be opened. I want you to imagine the door as the boundary between the life you have been repeating and the life that becomes possible when consciousness begins to move intentionally. On one side of the door is the familiar pattern. It is the identity shaped by old beliefs, automatic reactions, and habits that formed long ago. This side feels predictable even when it is uncomfortable, because the mind has learned how to survive within it. On the other side of the door is uncertainty, possibility, and the freedom to shape experience more consciously. Most people hesitate at this doorway because stepping through it requires a shift in identity. It asks you to stop seeing yourself as someone who is carried by events and begin seeing yourself as someone who participates in their unfolding. This shift does not mean controlling everything that happens in life. No one can command every circumstance or predict every event, but it does mean recognizing that your awareness, your assumptions, and your responses play a powerful role in the way reality takes form around you. I want you to remember what you have already discovered. Your thoughts influence the emotional atmosphere of your mind. Your emotional state influences the way you interpret events. The interpretations you create guide the decisions you make. The decisions you make shape the path your life follows. This chain of influence is always operating, whether you notice it or not. The moment you become aware of it, the door begins to appear in front of you. Opening the door does not require a dramatic moment of transformation. It often begins with small decisions repeated consistently. It begins when you notice an old thought pattern and choose a new perspective. It begins when you respond to fear with curiosity instead of retreat. It begins when you imagine a possibility and allow yourself to feel as if that possibility already belongs to your life. Each of these moments is like placing your hand on the handle of the door. I want you to see that creation is not a single act. It is a continuous process that unfolds through awareness. Every day you participate in shaping the emotional and mental environment in which your actions occur. The more consciously you participate in that process, the more intentionally your life begins to move. Instead of reacting to each event as if it was separate and random, you begin seeing the patterns connecting your inner world to your outer experiences. Another important realization appears when you cross this threshold. You begin to understand that the power to create does not mean forcing the world to obey your expectations. Creation often happens through alignment rather than control. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction, your life begins to flow more smoothly. Opportunities appear where confusion once existed. Conversations unfold more naturally. Decisions become clearer because they are guided by a consistent inner state. I want you to imagine what life looks like when this alignment becomes natural. Challenges still appear, because challenges are part of growth. But instead of interpreting them as signs of defeat, you see them as moments that invite creativity. Fear may still arise occasionally, but it no longer controls your direction. You observe it, learn from it, and continue moving forward. In this way, the role of the creator becomes part of your identity rather than an abstract idea. The final decree is not something spoken by an authority outside of you. It is a decision that emerges from your own awareness. It is the moment you recognize that the door has always been available and that stepping through it is a choice you can make repeatedly. Each day you can choose to approach life with the awareness that your thoughts, assumptions, and responses influence the experience you create. I want you to understand that opening this door does not isolate you from the world. In many ways, it connects you more deeply with it. When you recognize the influence of consciousness, you also begin to see the same potential in others. Compassion grows because you realize that everyone is navigating their own patterns of belief and awareness. Instead of judging others for their struggles, you see the possibility that they too may one day recognize the door in front of them. And this realization changes the way you move through life. Instead of waiting for reality to grant you permission to become the person you want to be, you begin living as that person now. You carry the qualities of curiosity, clarity, and intention into your daily actions. Over time, those qualities shape the environment around you. I want you to remember something simple as you move forward. The door does not appear only once. It appears again and again in the ordinary moments of your life. It appears when you choose awareness instead of reaction. It appears when you shift your perspective from limitation to possibility. It appears every time you remember that the present moment is the place where consciousness interacts with reality. And so the final decree is not a command. It is an invitation. The invitation is simple. Open the door, step through it with awareness, and begin creating your reality with the understanding that the power to shape your experience has been quietly waiting within you all along.